everyone. It's time for us to talk about the state of GitOps. I am your host, John Bristow. I'm the community director here at Octopus Deploy, and joining me are two of the smartest people I know at Octopus Deploy, Dan and Steve. We'll be turning things over to them in just a second, but before we begin, just some housekeeping items. We are live here today, and we would love to take your questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat, submit your questions here, and hopefully Steve and Dan will be able to answer them. If not, we'll make sure that we follow up at the end. Otherwise, we are here to talk about the State of GitOps report, which we have just recently published. So you'll be able to find this today over on our publication site. And we actually have a blog post that talks about this entitled The State of GitOps Report, Exploring Effective GitOps. This is by Steve, where he talks about our newly announced State of GitOps report, which you can find up on our publications page. If you want to download this right now, you can follow along. We're going to do kind of like the read along sort of thing here, but we're going to be highlighting some of the latest and greatest features of GitOps and the findings that we found by surveying over 660 people about their use of GitOps in the workplace that they work. So with that, let's go ahead and turn things over to Steve and Dan, who are going to talk to us about GitOps.
Hello, thanks for joining us, everyone.
Cheers.
I will throw up some slides in just a sec, but there's a basic structure to what we're going to go through today. We want to share what we were looking for, the reason we were being curious about GitOps, and then we're going to show you what we found, and then we're going to follow that up with like the crucial GitOps benefits, the reason people are using GitOps. So yeah, so welcome on board. That's our little agenda there, and there's another little reminder on there to download it, oct.2/state of GitOps. So, are you excited, Dan?
Yes, I think that this report, you did most of the heavy lifting on putting this report together, doing the data gathering and running the day-to-day. We talked about questions, we talked about takeaways, and there are several things in this report that straight up blew my mind. So I'm really excited to get into that and for people to get the full report, because GitOps is really becoming the state of the art and definitely the industry standard. And what you're going to find as we go through this is that the more people adopt GitOps, the more benefits they have. And we're going to tease out some of those details.
Very cool. So let's get into it. I'm going to start off by throwing up this slide here. And what we have on here is a bunch of stuff that makes up GitOps, what we think GitOps is. And then we've got some stuff that we've actually taken from DevOps research. Dora's research program's been going for over a decade. And they look at things like software delivery performance, reliability, and well-being, all great things. And the reason those are important is that they affect organization outcomes, which are the reason the business people want to do them. The reason we want to do them is that we actually quite like the well-being benefits and we like being productive in our work. So that's why we kind of wanted to look at this and say, do these white boxes, things that are related to GitOps, have any impact on the green boxes, which are DevOps metrics?
Yeah,
so,
and Steve, these items, they're a little bit different than the traditional GitOps definition that we have at opengitops.dev. And it's only because you wanted to tease out some of the specific things that people are doing, because sometimes when people look at the GitOps principles, they may say, oh yeah, I'm doing that, but when you actually tease it out, they find that they're not actually fulfilling that principle all the way. So some of these things, like human readable format, isn't necessarily something that is required as part of GitOps per se, but it is sort of a value that is related. So some of these are meant to, it's kind of a superset of, or I should say it's a subset of GitOps. All of these things fit within the GitOps umbrella so that we can score them. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's we actually took Open GitOps as our starting point for working out what we needed to explore. But what we wanted to do when we were reading a principle, like when we're talking about declarative desired state, we wanted to get under the hood and say, what is declarative desired state? Could that be in a non-human readable format? Does that make sense? And we didn't know the answer, but we were curious about it. So we broke it down and asked, more specifically those specific topic areas. Dan, this might be a good time actually to quickly run through the Open GitOps principles, just to kind of let everyone know where our starting point was for this.
Yeah, so it's at opengitops.dev. You can find this. This is the industry standard for what GitOps is. And this was done in collaboration with about 70, 80 different companies. We had over 100 individual contributors to that. And it has 4 components. First, it's declarative. Second, it's immutable and versioned. Third, it's pulled automatically. And 4, it's continuously reconciled. When we talk about what we're talking about, it's a system that is running using GitOps has to follow these 4 principles. And we've talked a fair bit about it, but there's a few things like declarative means that you have a format that is not imperative, right? It's not doing a step-by-step operation. It is expressing the desired state. And so you're relying on a system, a software agent to make that happen. And a lot of times people look at these principles, they hear GitOps and they say, oh, that means I store my stuff in Git. And Terraform is a good example. It's declarative. You store it in Git, and they'll say, sweet, I'm doing GitOps. But they're not necessarily following the other items of automatically pulling, continuously reconciling. So that's part of what we're teasing out in this survey is how people are considering GitOps, and then the impact of those different things.
That's right. And it doesn't even have to be in Git, right? It just needs to be in version control.
Yeah, that's right. We actually had somebody give a talk at GitOpsCon about doing sheet ops, and they were using Google Sheets, but because it was versioned and immutable, they were able to actually refer to it as following GitOps principles. Don't recommend it, but you know, possible.
It's always fun to poke around at the edges of this. So let's quickly dive into, I'm going to skim past this mostly, just the demographics of the responses we got. We got 660 responses from all continents, lots of different industries, and from people of all different experience levels. And this was super important because we wanted to get out to a wide audience, people that are doing GitOps in lots of different ways. And we also went out looking for people that were saying, we're not doing GitOps. We might be interested in it in the future, but we're not doing it now, because we needed some folks who we could compare GitOps
Yeah, we needed a control.
That's right. So yeah, we tried to get out. We snowballed it, and people very kindly shared the report and filled in the survey. We're super grateful because 660 is a really great number for us to, we can segment that and still have good samples to look at. So that was super useful. So thank you to everyone who did fill in the survey. And if you missed out, we will do another one, so you'll get a chance to participate next time. So how do we work out whether GitOps improves these DevOps outcomes? The way that we decided to approach this would be to give people a score based on the practices that they were adopting. Some of these practices are kind of binary. You are either using version control or you're not. And then in others, there were subtle differences. For example, on the reconciliation, we know in GitOps, some people are, instead of just automatically restoring the desired state, they actually flag it to someone to review. So we kind of scored those slightly differently, just to be able to test if there was a difference between those different modes. The reason we wanted to do this is because if we can break everything down to a score, we can then start looking at, if this score increases, do these other things increase? So yeah, the idea was, I suppose, if you got the maximum score, were you doing better than people who scored lower values? That's what we were looking at. And there's quite a lot of data in our report of people that are doing partial GitOps, very commonly things like version control and declarative state, but not automatic pull and continuous reconciliation. I suppose it'd be interesting to hear your view, Dan, on what you think maybe are the problems with missing that automatic pull and continuous reconciliation.
Yeah, when it comes to those components, that means you have an actively running software agent that is monitoring what's happening in your system, and it's monitoring your version control system. And There actually aren't that many tools that do that. In the Kubernetes world, of course, you've got Argo CD that is by far the most popular tool that does that. But in the traditional infrastructure world, we don't see that as much. And there are tools that come close that do a lot of it. I mean, Octopus Deploy is a good example where it's doing a lot of actually monitoring on state. But where people look at operations, oftentimes they start by thinking about infrastructure. So that's Terraform, maybe Pulumi, and that's a huge swath of everybody that's doing that. But then generally they're not running like an operator for like Terraform to actually monitor what's going on and doing state reconciliation. Some people do, but it's more rare. And then that gets into the application level. So you kind of have the infrastructure level and the application level. And we see people doing it a lot more rarely in some ways in the application level when you're outside of Kubernetes, but within Kubernetes that suddenly becomes much more common.
So yeah, so our score basically is on a 100-point scale, and when we plotted the scores across all of the responses, we ended up with a quite pretty S-curve of distribution of those scores. Lots of people at various points along that GitOps journey. And then we decided that we could use this score to compare to a similar 100-point scale for all of these different DevOps outcomes. Now, although there are 6 practices on our model, in order to determine these, there were actually 8 questions in total. And then so all of those 8 questions contribute to the score. So let's get into it. Let's see what the outcomes look like. And we're going to start with well-being. And well-being refers to job satisfaction and hopefully not feeling burned out, wanting to turn up for work, and not having your personal life affected by your feelings about your work. And what we found was there is a small relationship between GitOps score and well-being. So one of the interesting things about this is well-being can be affected by lots of things, including your boss, and if you have to do a long commute, all kinds of things like that. But there is this small difference that GitOps can make in amongst probably a whole host of other things that are going to affect your well-being.
Yeah, this is a good, because it's so many factors. This is actually a good example where there is an improvement the more people are doing GitOps. And what that probably represents in this case is actually that your organization kind of has it together, right? They're more likely to be organized, to have a systemic approach to things, to have a structured approach to software delivery. And that if your environment has that attitude, it's benefiting you, in myriad ways, right? Whereas if you're adopting some of the GitOps components, but not all of them, and sometimes it's messy, and then maybe your boss is kind of a jerk, and they're not super organized, and you're not being structured, and that team is over here fighting. Suddenly it's like, okay, yeah, we're not really fully adopting GitOps. It's not necessarily because of the technology, but it's because our organization is maybe having difficulty, organizing. But it is really cool to see that the more that people adopt GitOps, the more happy they tend to be.
Yeah, and we also check this not just against the GitOps score, which is like how well you're doing GitOps. We also check this against the amount of GitOps that you're using in your organization, because people that are adopting GitOps aren't necessarily using it at the moment for all production systems. Mm-hmm. They may be using it for just a subset, maybe 20%, and the rest hasn't migrated yet. But the more production systems that were brought into GitOps, the higher the well-being score as well. And I think we can probably, if we kind of just think about it without the data for a second, data is great, but we're also humans. One of the things that's going to probably make your day worse is going to be things like configuration drift, right? So let's head on now to the next one. And again, we're working our way through those DevOps outcomes. And the next one is reliability. Reliability is measured across 4 questions. And this is about meeting your service level objectives, making sure that your users are happy with the service, and hopefully making sure your application is available. And we see a kind of similar scale of difference here where GitOps is making teams and organizations more reliable. So again, this is good news.
Yeah, and this one, yeah, this one is also good news. I would almost put this one, it feels almost a little bit higher, just because it's like percentage change wise, there's a bigger percentage change between the low performers and high performers. So I'd almost put this one medium. But the fact is, okay, so it's like, all right, if we can adopt GitOps, my team's going to be a little bit happier. They're going to be a little bit more productive. They're going to enjoy their job more. They're going to be a little bit less likely to quit. That's all pretty good. But also, so that's the human side, but also on the software side, we're also going to see better reliability and we're less likely to have issues. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and that's going to mean you're spending more time developing features instead of troubleshooting, which has got to be a good thing. And this is where it then starts rolling up into business benefits, because you're being paid either way, but you could be doing something which is really adding value to your software, or you could be firefighting, which is effectively not progressing your software. So you're kind of falling behind all the time that you're having to spend time dealing with issues. So I think in a way, things like reliability probably also feed into well-being. If you have a more reliable system, that's going to make you feel happier than if you're constantly having to respond out of hours and do stressful emergency fixing. We've all been there.
Yeah. But Steve, I'm really just anxious to do the next one.
I know, I've been like trying to delay it as long as possible. So yeah, we've kind of primed it by showing these outcomes first, and showing these lines. And for those who don't know, this is just a linear regression line. So if you imagine that we plotted every response as a dot somewhere on this, and then this line is trying to find the path where it goes through the middle of all the dots. So we want to see slopes going up. That means there's a interesting relationship. But this next slide is super exciting. And actually, I have to mention, when I showed the next slide to Kostis, his reaction was superb. He had to double check with me what it meant, and he was like, "This is really big news." And I was like, "Yeah, it is." So that's probably enough fanfare. Let's get to it. So this is software delivery performance. Most folks are familiar with the DORA 4 keys. They measure throughput and stability, and they're widely regarded as a really strong indicator that your software delivery is in good health. And in this case, there's a really strong relationship here between your GitOps score and your software delivery performance. So, Dan, did we expect there to be such a big relationship here?
I mean, I think we definitely knew that there was going to be value and impact on DORA. We've seen that anecdotally from many people. We've seen it inside our own organization. We've seen it with our customers, with end users. So we definitely expected an impact. The fact that the impact is so large and so pronounced is pretty mind-blowing. And actually, if you study DORA and you ask and you say, hey, what makes the biggest impact on our DORA metrics? And for people that don't know the DORA metrics, maybe we should just very briefly explain that. So it's basically 4 components, and it is oh shoot.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, you do it.
So it's
I know
lead time for changes. So that's the time it takes from a commit to getting that change into production.
Oh, well, it's in order. It's frequency of deployments.
Yeah.
The amount of time between I don't know why I'm like having a hard time connecting the thing to the whatnot, but I'm having a stroke. Okay, so yeah, so deployment frequency, lead time for changes, how frequency deployments fail. So that's a regression. That's the R. And then the A is time to restore service, how long it takes for you to recover, right?
That's right. And okay, for the DORA metrics, we only look at problems that are caused by a change, by a deployment. We don't look at those spontaneous disk drives ejecting from your infrastructure type problems, although we still measure those separately.
Yeah. And DORA is a standard that Google really kind of pushed and spearheaded and started, but it's definitely an industry standard. And it's every metric, the DORA metrics, if you're doing well on DORA metrics, your company is typically doing well. Your developers are happier. There's all these benefits to doing well in DORA, and we're seeing some of that in this report. So if we go back, now that you know what DORA is, if you didn't know what DORA was, if we go back to the report, this impact that's rated large here, we're seeing that top performers of GitOps adopters are getting twice the DORA metric performance of the low end adopters of GitOps. That effect is not only huge, this is the single, adopting GitOps is the single biggest way you can improve your DORA metrics. There is no other software practice, delivery practice, team building exercise, vending machine, new coffee machine, whatever that you can do that has as big of an impact on your DORA metrics as just adopting GitOps. If all you do is adopt GitOps, your DORA metrics are going to be much, much better.
Hold on though. What about a ping pong table?
Ping pong table is a powerful effect. We might need to measure it independently.
So yeah, this is kind of big news for us. When I was looking at this, I had to double check this a load of times because it was a surprisingly large relationship, and so that made me think I'd made a mistake, so I had to check multiple times. But it's definitely there. These teams that are scoring high on GitOps are scoring high with software delivery performance. And the way we created that 100-point scale for the DORA metrics was just to give them equal weighting. As you know, on a lot of these, they're looking at, for deployment frequency, is it like on demand, or is it daily or weekly or monthly or quarterly? So we basically ratchet down the scores the longer it takes you to do a deploy to come up with these. So that's a super interesting effect. So to summarize the DevOps outcomes here, we think these things, these white boxes, actually do make a difference to these DevOps outcomes, which is super cool. But interestingly, these aren't the only benefits of GitOps. And that leads us to, actually, what I'll do before I actually move on, we did something a bit interesting here. So you may have seen models like this before, where we just show that there seems to be a relationship. And what we wanted to do is go one step deeper on this, actually, where we measured the effect of each individual practice on the outcomes. And I'll show the diagram for this, but I'll probably need to do a little bit of explanation on it. So this basically maps those 6 practices in the white boxes on the left to those 3 outcomes. And if there's a line, it means that we found a relationship. And then depending on how strong that relationship was, we made the line thicker. So you can see here that automatic pull actually makes quite a big difference, as an example, as does responsive code review, which is another one which has really thick lines. So I suppose, first of all, Dan, you mentioned earlier that a lot of people aren't necessarily buying into automatic pull and continuous reconciliation. This means they're missing out on something important, right?
Yeah, and the relationship that we're seeing here is that there is a big relationship between adopting automatic pull and continuous reconciliation on all of these key components, on the software delivery performance, on the reliability, on the well-being of your team. So as we look at these, the human readable format, very little effect. Now, that's probably because kind of everybody's adopted YAML at this point. So it's like, all right, I got YAML. Yeah, we're in YAML. And YAML overall might have a negative impact on personal well-being. Sometimes it feels that way when you're dealing with an indentation issue. But the 2 biggest kind of components we see here is the responsive code review, which definitely GitOps does help with. And then the automatic pull and the continuous reconciliation being the biggest drivers. And so part of the reason that we see such a big difference between low GitOps adopters and high GitOps adopters in their DORA metrics is because these last 2 really belong to the high performers. And so those high performers are getting that benefit, and that benefit is redounding this huge value to their teams and their organization.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's interesting. Responsive code review is an interesting one because if you're making your changes through the GitOps way by a commit to your version control repository, if that gets held up by a code review and you have to wait 3 days or a week, that means that this change that you were trying to make isn't happening, right? So that is basically causing a delay, which likely results in anything that needs to be done quickly being done outside of GitOps. So if I need to change my number of replicas to deal with an incident, but I know that my code review is going to take 3 days, I'm just going to go and issue a command, right?
Yeah, I actually think that we did see that there was a correlation. I don't know if we have it on a slide, but I think we did see it. There was a correlation between how responsive code review was and the adoption of the GitOps principles, right? Which is why that benefit, those practices end up being tightly linked. So then, and they end up showing that bigger benefit up at the top end of GitOps performers.
Yeah, so responsive code review is going to be really important in getting everyone into the habit of making every change through a commit instead of just logging into a portal or issuing a command. That we see that as being super important. And as I was saying just now, DevOps outcomes aren't the only outcomes of GitOps. And so we're going to have a look now at the more direct benefits of GitOps. And these are, when we were designing our survey, we asked a lot of people why they would adopt GitOps. And we used that to build a list of reasons you might adopt GitOps so that we could then find out whether people were actually getting those benefits. And these are the 6 things, the 5 things, I promise I am numerate, the 5 things that are the benefits of GitOps. And as you can see, quite a lot of people say that they're getting these benefits. They are making you more auditable, preventing configuration drift, making compliance and audits easier, having fewer people with elevated access to production systems, and increasing security. And in terms of numbers, there's strong agreement that you get these benefits from GitOps. As an additional bit of information on these, the high performers, if you just look at that group, had even higher numbers. So like on the auditability, which is 81% for the whole population, 93% of high performers said that they were getting these benefits. So there's an uplift. If you have all of the GitOps practices, you will be much more likely to get these. And so, Dan, are there any surprises here?
Well, that point that you bring up, and we should tweet out later the 2 numbers next to each other on these benefits, because oftentimes if something is just hype, the benefits that people expect to be will be more expected on the low end of the adopters, right? Because they're like, oh, I'm gonna adopt. It's like you're like AI, like, oh, AI is gonna do everything for me. It's gonna do everything for me, and you start using it, and you become disillusioned. There's a little bit of a trough of disillusionment as you realize, like, okay, it's not really good at that thing, or it's not ready for this thing. But then as you adopt it more, there you become, okay, these are the areas that it's good at, and it's really great at that, and I love that. But what we see with GitOps and with that trend that you're just bringing up is that as people adopt GitOps, they realize more benefits than they expected. So it's not hype, it's real. And so as people adopted GitOps, they look back and they say, oh, I actually do see that this is improving my security. So only 63% of people expected that. But then when they actually practice it, suddenly that's like, it's like 70%, 75% are like, actually, this is improving our security. And part of that comes down to actually implementing GitOps. When you first go to do it, and we might talk about this a little bit later, but there was a little bit of a J curve in some of the data that we looked at, where people at the low end were actually kind of more confident about their GitOps adoption. They're like, oh yeah, we're totally doing GitOps. And then as they actually adopt the practices, and so that's why we had to tease out some of those practices of GitOps, we see that they suddenly become less confident. because they realize, oh, I'm actually not doing some of these things. And some of my software delivery isn't set up to support GitOps, and I have to go and improve those things and make that value appear. And then they start to move dramatically up the curve where they realize these big benefits as they're implementing everything that they need to do to achieve GitOps. So even though the 4 principles of GitOps are really simple, implementing them does require a concerted effort. And oftentimes it's organization that's slowing people down from doing it. But there's definitely there's kind of a Dunning-Kruger effect in that J curve where it's once people start implementing, they hit this kind of trough of realization where they're like, oh, okay, I'm actually not doing all these things. There's a bunch of things I need to do. And so suddenly, people start to make progress and you see huge benefits come along with it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think this is what happens, right? When you're taking on something which requires some new skills and some practice, you're going to trip over your own feet at the start. That's part of the learning process. And if we divide all of the scores into quartiles, you actually see as people move from the kind of bottom quartile into the next one, they actually do sometimes drop a little in terms of their performance. But then when they move up to the next quartile, they get a huge payback on that investment, and they've got a whole other quartile still to go, which is good.
In fact, can we swap out your presentation right for the screen really quick? I just want to show that. But John, if you can put this other one up really quick, because this shows exactly what you're talking about, right? I can zoom in a little bit here. So yeah, this shows, like on the security one, that people, so on this left side, the high represents people that have high practices of GitOps, like they have good adoption of GitOps. You can see that for that group, a lot more people believe that it improves security than at the pre-adoption. They're like, yeah, I don't even see why that would have value for me. But as people adopt it, suddenly they're twice as likely to see the value from security. And it's the same thing on preventing configuration drift. High performers see huge benefit, right? Yeah. High performers on auditability, huge benefit. This is almost as startling as the DORA metrics. This data here, these data show that people, as they adopt GitOps, they realize more and more benefits. So it's no wonder that DORA is impacted so highly when we see data like this.
Yeah, and this is super interesting because you can see that as people are just starting out, they're actually quite skeptical about whether they're going to get the benefits. And that changes completely as they adopt more of the practices. And I think we keep talking about the reconciliation loop, which is the heart of GitOps. That's super important. Now, when we were looking at future adoption of GitOps, 93% of people were going to either continue with what they had or increase. So there's only 7% of people who have tried GitOps and are thinking maybe we won't carry on with this. But in the majority of those cases, they hadn't implemented automatic pull and continuous reconciliation, which is why one of the things that we really want to get out there as a message is those two things are super important. They're probably a little harder than putting something in version control. They're going to require skills that are new, and probably there's a bit of fear as well, because you're going to have an agent automatically updating your infrastructure and your application. But actually, that's what makes GitOps so successful.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to put up an image here. John, will you put this up? So this is, some people might be saying, hey, where's the AI? This is every company meeting you have, every Scrum meeting, every product planning session. Where's the AI? So what is the impact on AI on this? Okay, so let's just draw a line really quick. As your software engineering team adopts AI, they become more productive, right? They deliver more software more frequently. That's an increased load on your software delivery. And that means that your software delivery process becomes much more important. If you have a developer who used to deliver, let's say 5 changes a month, and they start delivering 15 changes a month, and then you replicate that off across your teams, you see this huge impact where suddenly you're delivering a lot more software. Maybe it's not getting checked quite as tightly as it used to be. If your rate of failure is 2%, if you 3x your software delivery productivity, that means that you have 3x'd the frequency of failures, even if the rate is unchanged, because you're doing more of it. So that just puts so much emphasis on getting your software delivery right. And what we're seeing from GitOps here is that it is the number one biggest impacting way to improve your software delivery performance. Does that make sense to everybody? I don't know. Nobody else is talking, but that makes sense, right, Steve?
It makes sense to me. And I think this is the crucial thing. I think when we're talking about developer productivity, we often make the mistake of looking at how fast people can type, right? That's the kind of mindset people have. But there's this whole stream of value. The developer makes a commit. If it's not easy to get that commit into production, it doesn't matter if you make that developer create more features faster. You're just creating more of a problem trying to get things to production. So when we're trying to optimize this, we need to look at that wider piece. We can't just kind of try and optimize the piece in the middle. We have to look at the whole end-to-end stream of value. So we have one more graph, which I'm going to show. So we showed the strength of relationship diagram for the DevOps outcomes. We've done the same thing for the GitOps outcomes. So which of these practices give us these outcomes? There's a lot more lines on here. And so I'm going to say this now, and hopefully I'm not overcommitting myself. I will create an interactive version of this where you can like click or hover, and it will highlight the area that you're interested in. But the way that I would read this is if the benefit I want is drift prevention, I'll look at that box and then I'll follow the biggest line backwards and say, do I have that thing? And so I will then be looking at things like responsive code review, version control, automatic pull, declarative desired state, and continuous reconciliation in that order, because that's the order in which the lines as they get thinner. So that's how I'd read this diagram. I know it's a lot in one go, but it just means that you can follow the lines back and forth to explore it. And this kind of shows where human readable format seems to shine in terms of the auditability and the reduced access. Now for audit, that makes sense, right? Because if you can't easily read the file and someone changes it, it's hard to audit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so all of this is available in the report, and I'll do my best to create interactive versions of this to make them easier to explore as well. So yeah, Dan, any thoughts on this spaghetti on the screen right now?
Well, actually, I think you covered the spaghetti really well. I wanted to point out maybe just two more interesting things that I took away from this report, and there's a bunch more in here. So if you have not downloaded the report yet, definitely go and do that and read this. And let's actually take this comment from Luke. He says, fantastic results. While exciting, was there anything surprising that perhaps challenged your initial hypotheses about GitOps adoption?
So there were some interesting surprises in there. We don't know necessarily the answer to this. We have some theories. When we looked at the production percentage, like how many of your production systems are using GitOps, there's this group of folks at the 0 to 10 to 20, and then there's loads of folks kind of spread out across, but there's a gap in the middle. I think it's around the 30-40% mark where not many people are at that level. And we spoke to quite a lot of people about this and presented to them and said, why do you think this is? One of the theories is if you have, say you've got loads of microservices and you prototype GitOps on a microservice, it actually might skip you past like those middle percentages, because you can take that template for what you've done and kind of quickly roll it out to a whole bunch of services. Mm-hmm. And then you only get stuck when you then come across the different thing that you then need to kind of prototype GitOps. How am I going to do GitOps for this different thing that's not a service? It's not like maybe it's a legacy app or something else like that. So that was
Yeah.
definitely a surprise.
Yeah, check out throw what's up on my screen there, John. So this is Dorometrics performance by score group, and you can see that J curve that we were talking about earlier, where pre-adoption people actually say that their metrics are better than when they have low adoption. Now, there's this. I thought this was surprising, and as we went through and looked at the results, this is kind of a little bit of a Dunning-Kruger. So it's kind of like a before adoption, you actually don't know what you don't know, and when you start adopting, you suddenly realize like, oh, like our performance isn't as good as I thought it was. And so there's kind of a revelation of like,
Yeah.
oh, we're actually missing stuff here. And so that pre-adoption ends up being I don't want to say hubristic, but like you kind of think you're doing better than you are. And then once you actually sit down and start adopting GitOps, it becomes clear to you all of the components in the process that you were missing. And so suddenly it's like, okay, now I've learned something. That was a surprise for us. But then you can see like as people adopt, they rapidly move way beyond the pre-adoption performance grouping. And you see this like 2x improvement in Dorometrics. From people at the high end versus the low end. So yeah, I thought that one was surprising. There was another one in here. Ooh, I don't know if I can get to it really quickly, but it was Europe versus the US, and Europe actually had slightly higher adoption on GitOps than North America.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things we found out about this is there are also regional differences, I think, in the prevalence of declarative versus imperative configuration. So they both say 47 on here because we've rounded. One of them is kind of 47 and one's 47 point something. So yeah, you'll find there's interesting differences like that. There's also a lot of difference by role. So
well, I was going to say the Europe thing actually. And I think this one, there's a relatively small difference. It might be within the error margin of error, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see actually better adoption in Europe, because I've noticed that, I'm in North America, I'm in the US, and I think sometimes the US is viewed as like leading, or North America is viewed as leading on technology, and that means that sometimes in the US people have a little bit too much confidence in what they're doing to listen to new trends. And so when Europeans, I notice, will sometimes say like, oh, what's the best way to do this? I just looked at it. Great. It's GitOps. Cool. We're going to go and adopt it. And so sometimes you'll notice, because I spent a lot of time going between KubeCon US and KubeCon Europe, that the people at KubeCon Europe are a little bit more excited and apt to adopt stuff. Because they're like, what's coming out? Oh, it's GitOps. That's the best thing. Sweet, we'll take it, because there's a little bit less ego involved in like what they've built and thinking that it's the best. I don't know if Steve, if that makes sense to you as representing the European side of the equation.
It's interesting because I think it might relate to a lesson that we learned. I mean, certainly in the UK, we were very early installing copper telephones everywhere, right? So we had this huge network of copper connecting every like house in the whole country. And that was a huge disadvantage when fiber optic was being used by everyone, because we had all this copper, like we'd invested. So we had this huge sunk cost fallacy, and we were still running, even until quite recently, we were running fiber up to a box on the street. And then the last 200 yards was still copper, right? So we had terrible broadband. And then recently we've finally caught up to what everyone else was doing, especially in countries where they hadn't had this huge investment in copper, where they just put fiber in end to end. And I think that can often happen to a software team if you've hugely invested in the thing that came before GitOps. You're gonna delay throwing that all away before you then move to the fiber optic of software delivery. That's
called like, second mover advantage.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah,
exactly. So I think that there might be that effect. So, and I think that we'll probably find over time it's like leapfrogging. So like when the next thing happens, then like the other people will skip over to that.
Yeah.
GitOps 2.0.
Let's put up this other comment from Luke. he says if organizations missing automatic reconciliation are 3x more likely to abandon GitOps, what early warning signs should leaders watch for to prevent this outcome?
That's such a good question. I think there are two different directions for this. One is we have just created a self-assessment that is based on the model that we built from the report. And that works practice first. So it's asking you about the practices you've got, and it gives you a score and some recommendations. And in general, like a large proportion of people that completed the survey, if they do the assessment, it's going to recommend these practices to them. So on the results page, you get a score and a graph, but you also get some recommendations. And that is going to help people from a practice first point of view. But equally, that list of benefits, as a leader, it's worth asking about those benefits and seeing if you're getting that return on investment for adopting GitOps so that you can self-check the outcomes. And one of the things that is always recommended when you're looking at a report like ours, we encourage you to try these out and test it for yourself. So, speak to your leaders and survey them and say, do you feel that since we have brought GitOps in, that things are more secure, right? And you can kind of get a sample from them and see if that's happening. And if it's not, you can then work out if it's a practice that you're missing, or maybe you've not promoted to those leaders something that's changed, a state that's changed. We often forget to communicate internally, like in the same way that we might if we were thinking about communicating externally. So that's the two approaches you can take. You can either, with leaders, they probably care more about the outcomes, and with your team, you probably want to assess against those practices.
Yeah, and I would add, like, if your team is pushing back and saying, "Oh, GitOps, it's not really practical," I'm not going to say that's always a warning sign, but it definitely is a question of like, okay, like what are we doing in our software delivery that is making adopting GitOps hard? And is there a way that we can actually maybe engineer around those? Maybe we're not doing it in the smartest way in the first place. So like when you're sometimes adopting improvements is hard when your foundation isn't good. And so you have some part of your process, and maybe it's based on your organization, right? This is what's the law where it always represents your organization? Conway's law.
Yeah.
Conway's law, whatever software you adopt tends to reflect the structure of your organization. And so there may be structural things in your company that are making GitOps adoption difficult. And we actually see this quite often. The technology for some companies is the easiest part. It's the organization that's the most challenging, because they'll say, hey, like, yeah, we're ready. We're gonna jump in with GitOps. And I think actually Luke talked about this in a KubeCon talk that he gave, where their organization, New York Times, saw that, and Luke, correct me if I'm totally wrong, and maybe it's a different organization, but I definitely heard this organization where everybody started adopting GitOps, and the developers weren't realizing that what was in Git was what was deployed. And so they would like throw it in Git and then be like, okay, now I'm going to email somebody and we're going to have a conversation about it, and they're going to check my code. And it's like, no. You did code review on your pull request. We're not doing it after it's merged. After it's merged, it's deployed. And so that kind of thing is like, you don't have necessarily good hygiene, and that's blocking your adoption, right? But think about it. You already have bad hygiene in your Git repo because you're merging stuff that wasn't reviewed. That was the problem. And I don't know if that was the New York Times problem exactly, but there was something about that. And it might have been a different organization. I probably shouldn't have even said the company, but it's just because he's in the chat right now, and I'm just like, he'll correct me if I'm wrong. So anyway, good question. Can we throw up what's on my screen too really quick here? So, and Steve pointed out in the chat that there is a self-assessment you can do at octopus.com/DevOps/GitOps maturity assessment. So definitely take advantage of that. Sorry, John. I'm like, do this, do that. But go do this self-assessment and check it out, and you get the experience. One of the things that I wanted to click on really quick is this report is not about Kubernetes. Okay. GitOps is strongly associated with Kubernetes. The most popular GitOps tools are built for Kubernetes. Kubernetes is particularly well suited for GitOps because it already works in a declarative format out of the box. You don't need any translation layer. But we did have 26% of organizations that were applying at least components of GitOps of our respondents to technology stacks that did not include Kubernetes. And so I liked this, what you wrote. I think you wrote this, Steve. This challenges the popular belief that GitOps is only for Kubernetes. So I thought that was a good result.
Yeah, and I think it's super important because when you break that thought pattern where you think, oh yeah, when we actually have moved more of our workloads to Kubernetes, then we'll look at GitOps. Actually, whatever you've got right now could benefit from this. There are ways, right? There's so much tooling out there that can help you to improve this. So don't be scared to have a look and see if there's a way of introducing GitOps to whatever stack you're using right now, because these benefits are all sat there waiting to happen. Yeah.
Luke in the chat, we'll highlight you one more time at least. He says some organization, the realization that Git changes become runtime changes was magical. Yeah. Great call.
And Matt Alford dug into that thought actually, because one of the things that we noticed when we were looking at the data was, in general, people were agreeing that GitOps meant you had fewer people needed elevated access to do operations. But on the very top performers, there was a slight increase in disagreement. Total surprise. And Matt Alford did a great post on this where he goes into the fact that the people using GitOps realize that your Git repo is now your control plane. Mm-hmm. So in a way, they're thinking, well, technically my commits are a form of elevated access now, which means you need to get your role-based access controls and your code review processes in place to make that secure.
Yeah, you can put it up on the screen here, John. I've got it on this on my screen. It's this little disagree cohort that bumps up when you have high GitOps adoption. And wait, say it again. What was the reason that we teased out for that?
So basically, so I think people all agree that it means that you have less access to direct access to the infrastructure, but there's an increasing realization that your repo is actually a form of elevated access now, because a change that you make via a commit is a change to your production infrastructure, which kind of ties back to what we were just saying about people not necessarily realizing that commit is effectively the same as running a command, which is why you need to make sure that you've got the right people who've got access, your review process is good. It's just so much easier in Git because the audit trail is really easy to read.
There's a lot of teams where kind of everybody has just merge access, and there's a tool in Git called the code owners file, and the code owners file allows you to specify folder paths to teams or members, rather than having the entire repo just be write access, and that also comes with are you doing branch protection on your main or master branch so that it has to go through a pull request, you have to be an admin or whatever. A lot of teams maybe aren't doing that, and so that could result in, as they adopt GitOps, they suddenly realize, oh geez, anybody can just deploy to production in a way that we didn't expect. So that's an interesting finding, but it is still, most people see a benefit in reducing elevated access when they adopt GitOps. So yeah, that's one to double click on. Can I do one more call out before we come into a close here?
Absolutely.
I have to call this one out because I'm an Argo maintainer. Love to see that Argo CD adoption is so high. Now, the only thing, remember, 23% of our respondents were not using Kubernetes. which means that for Kubernetes users, Argo CD adoption is about 60 to 70%. And this is what we're seeing in other places. On AWS, we see it's about 60%. Previously from CF data, about 2 years ago, we saw it was about 50% of Kubernetes clusters were using Argo CD. So we do continue to see that growth and adoption. Flux, and this isn't meant to be a knock on Flux at all. I think Flux is a great tool. What I commonly see is a lot of the Flux users are infrastructure teams, and they will quite often use Flux for the bootstrap process and then leave the rest to secondary operations. It could be running with Argo CD. So there's actually an overlap between Flux users and Argo CD users, or it could be being deployed another way. So it's kind of like I bootstrap my cluster, I bootstrap my components, and then I pass on deployment to a team who can then deploy their application on top of the baseline components of what's in that cluster, and they've used Flux to do that. So not a knock on Flux at all, but the adoption of Argo CD is definitely through the roof, and love to see that. I love to see Argo CD winning because we're the Argo CD company. So if you don't know CodeFresh, Octopus Deploy, we're one of the top leading maintainers on Argo, and have built a lot of really cool tooling around it. So definitely check that out if you get a chance.
Cool. So if you have any questions, and they might pop up to you later on, we're here. We'd love to talk about this. We've spent a few months really diving into this. So yeah, the more we can talk about it, the better. The less it will feel like we wasted our time. Like all this data if people ask questions. So
I think we have several blog posts that can come out of this. I mean, the Dorimetric one that we called out, I mean, that's a press release blog post. That's a go to a conference and learn about it. The fact that the #1 way to improve your Dorimetrics is to adopt GitOps is a pretty mind-blowing finding.
Awesome stuff. So for those folks, just to remind you all, this is now available. You can just submit your details and you can download the report now. Makes a great read. So make sure to check that out up on octopus.com/publications. Just want to remind folks that we actually also have our GitOps certifications. And for those folks who have stayed, we have a special code for you. You can get a free GitOps fundamentals course by using the promo code /coupon code State of GitOps 25. So if you go to learning.codefresh.io, you'll see a site that looks like this. This is where we provide a number of our certifications. We have 3 courses currently available: GitOps Fundamentals, GitOps at Scale, and GitOps Enterprise. And if you use that code that you see scrolling at the bottom of your screen, this is only available till I think July. So make sure to use this. This is State of GitOps 25 to register for GitOps Fundamentals
and
get
when
that
you
started.
sign up, if you do the bundle that's right below where you were showing the 3 courses, but if you get all 3 of them, you'll get that discount applied to the discount on the bundle, which is huge. And I'll emphasize, this is not just a certification. This is a training with hands-on labs, with exercises, with course materials, and a Discord community where you can connect with me, with other folks that are professionals doing GitOps. So definitely, if you have not done this, it is one of the quickest ways to get going with Argo CD, with GitOps, and start getting these benefits. Start getting that Dora.
That's right. Well, awesome. Thank you very much to Steve and Dan. Thank you for your time and attention joining us here today. Hopefully you'll get some value out of the report. And from all of us here to all of you, happy deployments, everyone. Take care.
Good.